Imagine you're holding your newborn child.
Mhm.
You look down at this tiny infant, and instead of feeling that, that totally familiar, universal urge to teach them how the world works, you realize something profoundly disorienting.
Right.
You realize this child actually holds the key to the fundamental nature of reality. And eventually you're going to have to sit at their feet, completely dismantle your own ego, and beg this child to teach you how to achieve ultimate spiritual liberation.
I mean, it completely shatters the expected mold of human relationships, doesn't it? The biological constant of a parent imparting wisdom to their kid is just, it's totally inverted. The mother becomes the disciple, and the son becomes the guru.
Yeah, exactly. And that mind-bending inversion is exactly the journey you and I are taking today. Welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We are going to be piecing together the biography, the mythology, and the monumental intellectual achievements of a figure known as Sage Kapila Muni.
Right, the man who is widely revered as the father of philosophy.
Exactly. Our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack his life story and explore his absolute masterpiece, which is the creation of Samkhya philosophy, and that is the oldest intellectual system in India.
And to do this justice, we are pulling from a really massive stack of sources today.
You really are.
We've got philosophical journals that break down his dualistic universe. We've got excerpts from the Vedanta Kasari, historical and sociological analyses of the Gangasagar Mela.
Which is fascinating, by the way.
Oh, totally. Plus, insights from the Mysore yoga traditions, and of course, those foundational traditional Vedic texts, right? Like the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Ramayana, and the Mahabharata. So we are covering everything from ancient epics to modern academic papers.
Because Kapila isn't just like a historical footnote. He is simultaneously celebrated as a divine incarnation, a rigorously logical philosopher, and a massive cultural force.
Yeah, you really cannot separate the myth of his life from the math of his philosophy. They are entirely intertwined.
They really are. And to understand the weight of his achievements, I think we have to drop you right into the environment that produced him. The texts situate his birth in a period called the Satya Yuga.
Right, which, if we look at the context of Hindu cosmology, is the first and most spiritually attuned of the four world ages.
Okay, so set the scene for us. What does that mean?
Well, the Satya Yuga is basically characterized by this intrinsic alignment with truth and virtue. It's an era where spiritual practice isn't a massive struggle. It's just the default state of existence.
So everyone is just inherently highly elevated.
Exactly. And it's within this highly elevated environment that we meet Kapila's parents. And they carry some incredibly heavy cosmic lineage.
Oh, yeah. His father is the great sage Kardama, who is described as a mind-born son of the creator god Brahma.
And his mother is Devahuti. She's the daughter of the first Manu, who is effectively the progenitor of humanity in this tradition.
So this is not your average couple.
Not at all. And the sources emphasize that Kardama and Devahuti were profoundly aware that their union wasn't going to produce, like, an ordinary child.
Right, because Lord Brahma himself actually appears to Devahuti prior to the birth. He reveals that an incarnation of the Supreme Lord would be born from her womb, specifically to impart spiritual knowledge to her.
Yeah. We see Kapila celebrated in these texts as the fifth incarnation or avatar of Lord Vishnu.
Though some traditions also associate him really closely with Agni, the Vedic god of fire, right?
Yes, exactly. And the physical descriptions of him in the Srimad Bhagavatam are just intensely vivid. He is born with golden hair, eyes like lotus petals, and literal lotus marks on his feet.
Which sounds incredibly striking. What do those features actually signify?
Well, those visual markers, the golden hair and the lotus features, they operate as immediate iconographic shorthand in Vedic literature. They signal to the reader right away that we are dealing with a being of absolute spiritual perfection.
But the concept of the avatar here serves a much deeper philosophical purpose than just, establishing his divine credentials, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It actually bridges a massive ideological divide in ancient Indian thought.
Let's explore that divide, because at the time, you basically have two major competing ideas about how ultimate realization works.
Right. So on one side, you have the Vedantic concept of an eternal supreme god, Ishvara, who rules from the top down.
Okay.
In that view, liberation comes through the grace of this eternal deity. But on the other side, you have the early foundational ideas of Samkhya and later Buddhism, which are entirely humanistic.
Meaning it's all based on human effort.
Exactly. They argue that perfection is achieved from the bottom up. A human being works, meditates, exerts tremendous effort, and eventually becomes perfect.
So it's basically a self-made enlightened being versus an omnipotent deity dispensing grace. Those seem pretty irreconcilable.
They do, but the Puranic doctrine of the Avatar reconciles them perfectly right in the figure of Kapila.
How?
The texts propose that the ultimate perfected sage, the human who has achieved total self-reliant realization, is actually the eternal God willingly taking on a human form through his own power of illusion, or Maya.
Oh, wow. So Kapila is the living embodiment of that synthesis. He's the ultimate self-made human philosopher who analyzes reality, but fundamentally he is Vishnu descended.
Precisely.
And the domestic situation he's born into is incredibly complex. There was this strict pre-birth agreement between his parents, Kardama and Devahuti.
Right. And despite her divine lineage, Devahuti was deeply attached to the material world. She really desired the ultimate sensory and worldly experiences.
And she asked her husband, this incredibly powerful sage, to manifest that for her.
And he follows through in a way that practically defies imagination.
Yeah.
I mean, the texts describe him manifesting this opulent flying aerial mansion.
Some flying mansion.
Yeah, a flying mansion, surrounded by celestial gardens, complete with every conceivable luxury and physical pleasure. He basically gives her material enjoyments that even the gods would envy.
So he fulfills his duty as a householder to an absolute extreme.
Exactly. But there was a catch.
The agreement.
Right. The agreement stipulated that the moment Kapila was born, Kardama would depart. He would enter the Vedic stage of sannyasa, which is the renounced order of life.
So he gives his wife literally everything the material world has to offer. They have this divine child, and then Kardama just walks away into the forest to seek spiritual perfection.
And he leaves a weeping Devahuti behind. It's this incredibly stark demonstration of cutting the ties of attachment. Kardama fulfills his societal obligation, but he doesn't let the luxury he created bind him.
Now put yourself in Devahuti's position. You have experienced the absolute pinnacle of material wealth and sensory pleasure, and then abruptly, the provider of all of that just leaves.
Right.
The sources describe her falling into a profound existential crisis. The sting of his departure forces her to realize that all those spectacular worldly pleasures were entirely ephemeral.
Yeah, they provided intense stimulation, but they didn't offer any lasting peace or stability. The material world just completely fails her.
It leaves her with this immense spiritual void. And so, surrounded by all this lingering luxury, she turns to the only source of absolute truth she has left, her son.
This is where we see that massive paradigm shift we talked about earlier. She approaches Kapila and explicitly asks him to become her guru.
She asks him to dispel her ignorance and teach her how to navigate out of the suffering caused by her material attachments.
Think about that. She is asking a child to teach her how to systematically dismantle her own ego.
It's wild, and the resulting dialogue is recorded in the Bhagavatam as the Kapila Gita. He begins this really profound process of psychological uncoupling with her.
Right. He explains that as long as she identifies her core self with her physical body, and by extension her bodily possessions, her status, her past relationship with her husband, she's guaranteed to suffer.
The mind and the soul basically have to cultivate a deep disinterest in worldly pleasures.
And what's truly remarkable is her capacity to receive this. She doesn't pull rank as his mother. She completely surrenders to the instruction.
The texts describe her engaging deeply with his teachings on bhakti yoga, which is devotional yoga, and ultimately achieving samadhi.
Right, samadhi being a state of intense, non-dual meditative consciousness. She realizes the fundamental truth of his teachings, that he is the supreme Brahman.
And that her true nature is entirely separate from the material world she was so attached to.
Exactly. She sheds her material bondages completely and achieves liberation.
It is a stunning biographical arc. I mean, she goes from demanding the most opulent material luxuries in existence to achieving total ascetic spiritual liberation entirely guided by her son.
It really is. And the specific philosophical mechanics that Kapila used to liberate his mother, they didn't just remain some private family dialogue.
No, they didn't. They became the foundational bedrock of his masterpiece Samkhya philosophy.
And this is where we really transition from Kapila, the divine son, to Kapila, the father of philosophy, because Samkhya is recognized universally as the most ancient systematic philosophy of India.
It laid the groundwork for almost every tradition that followed it. And the word Samkhya itself gives us a massive clue about how his mind operated, right?
Yeah, the sources translate it literally as to count, or numerical enumeration. It also carries the meaning of correct knowledge, or pure knowledge.
So Kapila looked at the terrifying, chaotic complexity of the universe and decided to map it mathematically. He was an absolute master of categorization.
He essentially built a metaphysical periodic table of existence. But to really understand the system he built, we first have to understand the motivation behind it. Like, why spend your life meticulously categorizing every facet of reality?
According to the Samkhya Karika, which is the foundational text summarizing his teachings, this massive intellectual undertaking begins with a very simple, universal human experience: distress.
Right. The entire goal of Samkhya is absolute permanent freedom from what Kapila termed the threefold suffering, or dukkhatraya.
Kapila's premise is that human existence in its default state is just permeated by suffering. And he didn't view this pessimistically, did he?
No, not at all. He viewed it diagnostically. He categorized all human misery into three distinct buckets. And honestly, if you look at our own lives today, we can see exactly how accurate this diagnostic tool is.
Let's break those down because they are incredibly relatable for you, the listener. The first category is adhyatmika. This is suffering that originates entirely from within your own individual ecosystem, your body and your mind.
Yeah. So if you wake up with a migraine or you pull a muscle, that's physical adhyatmika suffering. But it's also psychological.
Or anxiety.
Exactly. The anxiety you feel before a big presentation, the grief of losing a loved one, the looping depressive thoughts that keep you awake at night, all of this is internally generated suffering.
The cause and the effect are both housed within your own being.
Precisely. Now, the second category shifts outward. Adhibhatika.
Okay, so what's that?
This is suffering inflicted upon you by other living entities or external objects in the natural world.
Right. So this is the mosquito that bites you, the dog that chases you, or, the driver who cuts you off in traffic and ruins your morning.
Exactly. Or a betrayal by a friend, or a physical altercation. The source of the suffering exists in the material world, outside of your own body, and it acts upon you.
And then there's the third category, which covers the things that are completely out of your control, adhidivika.
Yeah, this is suffering caused by cosmic, divine, or unseen forces. These are the massive, impersonal forces of reality.
Like a hurricane destroying your home, an earthquake, a lightning strike.
Right. And in the ancient context, this also included things like the whims of planetary alignments, fate, or unseen entities. It's basically the suffering that just drops out of the sky with no warning and no immediate, tangible entity to blame.
So Kapila looked at this threefold matrix of misery: internal, external, and cosmic. And his mission was to find a permanent escape hatch. Not just a temporary band-aid, but a fundamental severing of the human experience from this suffering.
And his method for finding that escape hatch is pure genius. He realized that to escape the system, you first have to understand exactly what the system is made of.
Which leads to the absolute core of Samkhya, the dualistic universe. Kapila looked at the entirety of existence and cleaved it into two distinct, absolute, and eternal categories.
And nothing else exists outside of these two principles. They are Purusha and Prakriti. This division is arguably one of the most consequential concepts in the history of Eastern thought.
Let's define them carefully for the listener. Purusha is pure, unadulterated consciousness.
Right. It is the spirit, the soul, the silent observer. It is eternal. It never changes. And crucially, it is completely passive. It does not act. It only witnesses.
And on the other side, you have Prakriti. Prakriti is primordial matter. It is everything in the universe that is not pure consciousness.
It's active, it's dynamic, it's constantly mutating and evolving. The physical universe, the elements, nature, that is all Prakriti.
The brilliance of Kapila is how he explains the interaction between these two. Because if Purusha is completely passive and doesn't actually do anything, how does the universe function? How does creation happen?
Well, the sources provide a stunning analogy for this. Think of Purusha, pure consciousness, as a highly powerful, completely static magnet.
Okay, a magnet.
It just sits there on the table. It has no volition, no desire to move. Now think of Prakriti, primordial matter, as a pile of iron filings scattered nearby.
Ah, I see. The magnet doesn't do anything to the filings. It doesn't reach out and grab them.
Exactly. But its mere presence, its proximity, energizes those iron filings. The filings are forced into motion, forming intricate dynamic patterns entirely because the magnet is near.
So Purusha is the witness, doing nothing but observing. Prakriti is doing all the dancing, all the evolving, all the complex mutating into planets and trees and human bodies.
But Prakriti only evolves because it is vitalized by the presence of Purusha. Let's zoom in on the iron filings for a moment, though.
Sure.
Kapila explains that Prakriti isn't just a homogeneous blob of energy. In its unmanifested dormant state, Prakriti is actually composed of three fundamental qualities, or gunas.
The three gunas, these are like the invisible threads that weave the fabric of reality, right? First, you have sattva, which represents clarity, light, harmony, and intelligence.
Right. Then you have rajas, which is dynamism, movement, passion, and kinetic energy.
And finally, tamas, which is inertia, darkness, heaviness, and ignorance.
So in the beginning, before the universe manifests, these three gunas are in a state of perfect, equal equilibrium. They balance each other out completely, so nothing happens. The universe is completely dormant.
But the moment that balance is disturbed, specifically by the proximity of the observing Purusha, the equilibrium shatters.
Yes. The gunas start interacting, dominating one another, mixing in infinite combinations. And that disturbance triggers a cascading evolution of matter.
The universe begins to pour out of unmanifested Prakriti into manifestation. And this is exactly where Kapila's enumeration, his obsessive categorizing, kicks into high gear.
He maps out this evolution step by step, resulting in a list of exactly 25 elements, or tattvas, that comprise the entirety of reality.
Let's walk through this evolution, because it completely redefines how we understand ourselves. We start with the first two. The uncreated foundational principles, Prakriti, which is nature or matter, and Purusha, which is consciousness.
So that's 1 and 2. Now, the equilibrium of Prakriti shatters. What is the very first thing that evolves out of primordial matter?
The first evolution is cosmic intelligence, or intellect, which Kapila calls Mahat.
Right. And from intellect, the next thing to evolve is ego, the sense of I-ness or individuation, which he calls ahamkara.
We have to pause here, because this is where Kapila drops a philosophical bombshell that completely separates him from Western thought.
Oh, massively. Notice what category intellect and ego are in. They evolve from Prakriti. Kapila is categorizing intellect and ego as matter.
Yes, they are physical, material constructs. They are not spirit. They are not consciousness.
This is a huge paradigm shift. We are so conditioned to equate our minds, our intellect, and our sense of I with our soul. We think, I am my thoughts.
But Kapila fundamentally rejects this. He says your intellect and your ego are just highly subtle, highly refined forms of matter. They belong to the iron filings, not the magnet.
Exactly. True consciousness, actual awareness, belongs only to Purusha.
It is breathtaking. He essentially birthed ancient Indian psychology with this distinction. He's arguing that your mind is effectively a machine.
Right. It's an organ made of subtle matter. It acts like a mirror. It reflects the light of the true soul, the Purusha, which makes the mind appear to be conscious.
But the mind itself is just inert matter running programs based on the gunas.
So your true individuality, your true self, doesn't lie within your racing thoughts, your intellect, or your ego. Those are constantly changing, which proves they are Prakriti. Your true self is only the silent, unchanging observer.
Okay, let's keep following the evolution down from ego. So from ego, the evolution actually splits.
Right.
On one side, we get the mind itself, manas, which processes sensory input. Then we get the 5 sense organs, the capacities for hearing, touch, sight, taste, and smell.
And notice these are the capacities, not the physical organs themselves yet.
Got it. And alongside them, evolve the 5 organs of action. The capacities for speech, grasping with hands, walking with feet, excretion, and reproduction.
He is systematically breaking down the exact mechanics of how a human being interfaces with reality.
Then, on the other side of the split from ego, we get the 5 subtle elements, or tanmoitras. These are the raw, subtle potentials of sound, touch, form, flavor, and odor.
Think of these as the mathematical blueprints for the physical world. It's the concept of form before a physical object actually takes shape.
And finally, from those subtle blueprints, the evolution densifies into the 5 gross elements that make up the physical, tangible world: earth, water, fire, air, and ether or space.
And that completes the list of 25. He started with pure consciousness and primordial matter, and mathematically mapped out how that cascades down to the grossest rock and the subtlest thought.
And every single thing on that list, from element 2 down to element 25, intellect, ego, mind, senses, physical matter, is Prakriti. It is all matter.
It's incredible.
So how does knowing this massive list solve the problem we started with? How does this end the threefold suffering?
Well, because Kapila identifies the absolute root cause of all human suffering as ignorance, specifically the ignorance of false identification.
How so?
We suffer because the silent observer, the Purusha, gets confused. Looking into the mirror of the mind, the Purusha falsely identifies with the Prakriti.
Oh, I see. We think we are the iron filings. We forget we are the magnet.
Exactly. You stub your toe and your mind registers the pain. But because of ignorance, the Purusha thinks, I am in pain.
Right, or your ego is insulted and the Purusha thinks, I am angry.
Yes. The consciousness becomes hopelessly entangled in the drama of the matter it's observing.
Liberation, then, what the texts call kaivalya, is achieved purely through intense, sustained discernment. It's the realization, deeply felt, that I am not this body, I am not these racing thoughts, I am not this anxiety, I am the eternal, untouched Purusha.
And the moment you truly sever that false identification, the threefold suffering cannot touch you. The gunas just lose their grip.
And this framework necessitates another groundbreaking concept from Kapila regarding how the universe operates on a mechanical level. This is his theory of cause and effect, known as Satkaryavada.
Right, and this is where Kapila basically predicts the foundational laws of modern physics. Satkaryava asserts a very specific rule about reality. The effect already resides within its cause.
Meaning?
Prior to manifestation, the effect exists in a latent state within the material cause. Nothing is ever created out of nothing. The manifestation we see in the world is just the effect becoming visible.
The finer, unmanifested state is the cause, and destruction is simply an object returning to its causal, unmanifested state.
The texts provide a beautiful analogy here. Think about a massive walnut tree.
Okay.
The energy that eventually grows into that tree is fundamentally no different from the walnut itself.
Yeah.
The entire tree was always present in a latent potential form within the seed.
Modern science echoes this perfectly with the law of conservation of mass and energy. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed from one state to another. Kapila was articulating the eternal continuity of matter 2,600 years ago to explain how Prakriti evolves and divides.
It is an overwhelming intellectual achievement. But Kapila's legacy doesn't just exist in the abstract realm of consciousness and subtle elements.
No, it doesn't. While his philosophy mapped the mind, his mythological biography quite literally reshaped the physical geography and the living cultural practices of the Indian subcontinent.
Which brings us to the legend of the fiery sage. We really have to look at the stories from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata involving King Sagara, because they demonstrate Kapila not just as an analytical thinker, but as an ascetic possessing terrifying, world-altering power.
The story begins with King Sagara, who is a spectacularly powerful ruler of the Solar dynasty and an ancestor of Lord Rama. Sagara is at the height of his power, and he decides to perform the Ashwamedha sacrifice.
For context, the Ashwamedha, or horse sacrifice, is the ultimate flex of royal supremacy in ancient India.
How does it work?
A king consecrates a magnificent horse and lets it roam entirely freely across the continent for a full year, followed by his army.
Okay, so if the horse wanders into a neighboring kingdom, that local king has two choices, right? Submit to the emperor's supremacy and let the horse pass, or capture the horse and fight the emperor's army.
Exactly. And if the horse returns unchallenged after a year, the king who sent it is universally recognized as the undisputed sovereign of the world.
And King Sagara has successfully completed this massive undertaking 99 times.
Which is just an unheard of feat of dominance. But performing 99 Ashwamedha draws the intense scrutiny of the heavens. Specifically, it draws the attention of Lord Indra, the king of the gods.
Right, because Indra's position is actually tied to this specific ritual. According to tradition, Indra has performed exactly 100 Ashwamedha sacrifices. That's what secures his throne in heaven.
So when he sees a mortal king about to complete his 100th sacrifice, Indra becomes deeply insecure. He's terrified that King Sagara will usurp his celestial throne.
Driven by this jealousy and fear, Indra decides to intervene and sabotage the final sacrifice. He descends to earth, uses his divine powers to steal the consecrated horse, and hides it.
But the location he chooses to hide the horse is a stroke of manipulative genius.
He takes the horse deep into the subterranean realm, into the abyss known as Patalok, and he ties the horse up right outside the hermitage of Sage Kapila, who happens to be sitting there in a state of deep, millennia-long meditative trance.
Indra knows exactly what he's doing. He is weaponizing Kapila's aura against King Sagara's arrogance.
Meanwhile, back on the surface, King Sagara is frantic. The sacrifice is ruined without the horse. He commands his 60,000 sons, which is a number emphasizing the sheer, overwhelming scale of his royal power, to scour the entire earth to find it.
And these 60,000 princes just tear the world apart, eventually digging deep into the earth's crust, arriving in the subterranean realm.
And there, they find the horse, grazing peacefully next to an ash-covered ascetic whose eyes are closed in meditation.
The princes, fueled by the arrogance of their royal status, jump to the most catastrophic conclusion possible. They assume this silent yogi is the thief who stole their father's glory.
The texts describe them violently interrupting his penance. They surround him, brandishing weapons, screaming accusations, and physically assaulting him.
This moment in the epic is deeply symbolic when viewed through the lens of Kapila's own philosophy.
How so?
The 60,000 princes represent the absolute embodiment of unchecked ego, blind materialism, and royal arrogance. They are completely dominated by the rajas and tamas gunas, aggressive passion and blind ignorance.
They are so blinded by their own ego that they look at a being of infinite spiritual magnitude and see only a criminal standing in the way of their political power.
And the consequence of that ignorance is apocalyptic. The texts are very specific about Kapila's reaction. He doesn't curse them, he doesn't engage in an argument or defend himself.
He simply opens his eyes.
The immense spiritual power he has accumulated through eons of uninterrupted meditation, his yogani, the fire of his ascetic austerity, blazes outward from his gaze. In a fraction of a second, the sheer force of his awakened consciousness reduces all 60,000 armed princes to literal piles of ash.
It is the ultimate mythological assertion of spiritual authority over temporal political power. You can bring an army of 60,000 princes, but material force means absolutely nothing when confronted by the concentrated reality of a fully realized, self-illuminated soul.
It's a terrifying demonstration. And because they died committing sacrilege against a realized sage, the souls of the 60,000 princes are condemned to the nether regions, unable to ascend to heaven.
But Kapila, despite the destruction, is ultimately a figure of liberation, right?
He is. The story doesn't end with annihilation. Decades later, a descendant of King Sagara named Amshuman bravely ventures down into the abyss.
He finds the ashes of his ancestors, and he approaches Kapila not with weapons, but with profound humility and reverence. He begs the sage to tell him how these 60,000 souls can be redeemed.
And Kapila, pacified by the humility, reveals the only possible path to their salvation. He states that the ashes must be washed by the waters of the heavenly river Ganga, the Ganges, which at that time flowed only in the celestial realms.
This pronouncement sets off a multi-generational epic quest by the kings of the solar dynasty. They perform immense penances, trying to convince the gods to let the Ganges fall to earth.
Finally, generations later, a king named Bhagiratha succeeds. Through incredible asceticism, he convinces the goddess Ganga to descend from heaven.
She flows down to earth, follows Bhagiratha to the ocean, and descends into the subterranean realm, washing over the ashes at Kapila's ashram.
And the touch of that sacred water immediately liberates the 60,000 souls, allowing them to ascend to heaven.
And the physical path the river took to reach the ashes created the geographical Ganges River that defines the Indian subcontinent today.
It's an incredible story. And the most amazing part of this mythological narrative is that it is fundamentally tied to a living, breathing reality today.
Yes. The sources highlight that this exact story is the literal foundation for one of the largest human gatherings on Earth, the Gangasagar Mela.
The Gangasagar Mela is a massive annual religious congregation. It's actually second in size only to the Kumbh Mela. It takes place every year during the festival of Makar Sankranti.
And it happens at the exact geographic location where the river Ganges meets the Bay of Bengal Sagar Island.
Right, which is the location traditionally believed to be the site of Kapil Muni's Ashram, where the ashes of the princes were washed.
Millions of pilgrims travel to this remote island every single year. They take a holy dip at the confluence of the river and the ocean to wash away their sins, directly echoing the redemption of the 60,000 princes. And then they immediately visit the Kapil Muni temple, situated right on the beach.
It proves that Kapila is not just some theoretical concept trapped in ancient manuscripts. He is a physical, experiential destination. Millions of people physically interact with his legacy every year.
His philosophical treatises shaped the intellectual elite, but his mythological power captured the enduring cultural heart of the masses.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that influence only expands when we look at the legacy of his ideas. Kapila's Samkhya didn't exist in a vacuum. It was so rigorously structured, so undeniably foundational, that it became the underlying bedrock for almost every subsequent spiritual, philosophical, and even scientific movement in ancient India.
You really cannot understand Eastern spirituality without understanding Kapila. Let's start with yoga, because Samkhya and yoga are deeply intrinsically intertwined. They are historically referred to as twin sisters.
Right. If Samkhya provides the theoretical framework, the meticulous 25-element map of the territory of reality, then yoga provides the practical vehicle you use to navigate that territory.
Samkhya diagnoses the problem of false identification, and yoga provides the physical and mental exercises required to actually separate the Purusha from the Prakriti.
Exactly. When Patanjali composed the Yoga Sutras, which is the foundational text of yoga, he didn't reinvent the wheel. He fully imported Kapila's entire metaphysical framework.
The psychology of the mind, the gunas, the dualism, it's all Samkhya.
Yep. The 8 limbs of yoga are explicitly designed to achieve the exact realization Kapila outlined.
The sources highlight that this unity was universally recognized in antiquity. The Bhagavad Gita in chapter 5 states it unequivocally. It says, "Only children, those who are ignorant, claim that Sankhya and Yoga are different."
It reinforces that they are simply 2 different methodologies leading to the exact same destination of liberation.
However, there is one massive, crucial divergence between the two systems as they evolved, and it centers around the concept of a creator god.
Right, and this is a massive point of contention. Patanjali's yoga system formally accepted Ishvara, a supreme being, or God, as a distinct entity.
In yoga, Ishvara acts as a focal point for meditation. It's a tool to help the yogi concentrate and surrender the ego.
But original Samkhya, as laid out by Kala in the classical texts, remains completely stubbornly silent on the existence of a creator god.
Kapila's system of the 25 elements doesn't factor God into the equation of how the universe evolves or how suffering is ended. The interaction of Purusha and Prakriti is entirely sufficient to explain reality.
And this silence on a deity made Samkhya highly attractive to and compatible with another massive movement emerging at the time, Buddhism.
The historical crossover here is absolutely fascinating. Gautama Buddha lived around 500 BCE, and the traditional texts state that he heavily studied Kapila's Samkhya system before his own awakening under the Bodhi tree.
Kapila predates the Buddha, and the philosophical DNA of Samkhya is woven deeply into early Buddhism.
The similarities are undeniable. Both classical Samkhya and early Buddhism are fundamentally humanistic and analytical. Crucially, they both fiercely reject the Vedic system of sacrificial ritualism.
They recognize that burning offerings to appease the gods doesn't end human suffering. It merely perpetuates the cycle of material existence.
They were both saying that you cannot buy your way into liberation. You can't depend on divine grace to swoop down and save you while you remain passive. You have to depend entirely on your own rigorous effort, your own meditation, and your own intellect to dismantle your ego.
The sources provide a really profound quote from a canonical Buddhist text that perfectly echoes the self-reliant ethos of Kapila. It says, "You yourselves must make the effort. The Buddhas do but point the way."
Both traditions argue that the sage can hand you the map, but you have to walk the path yourself.
And this analytical approach, breaking the universe down into its constituent parts to understand how it functions, didn't just influence spirituality. It profoundly shaped ancient Indian science, most notably Ayurveda, the traditional system of medicine.
Ayurveda is effectively the medical application of Samkhya philosophy. It takes Kapila's exact enumeration of the 5 gross elements, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, and maps them onto the human body as the 3 doshas.
It applies Kapila's rule of Satkaryavada, cause and effect, directly to pathology.
So if a patient is suffering from inflammation, Ayurveda diagnoses that as an excess of the fire element. The treatment involves applying cooling elements to restore the equilibrium of the system.
You find the cause and the imbalance of the elements, you remove it, and the effect of the disease disappears. It is Kapila's physics applied to human biology.
His influence is so ubiquitous that the great 19th century philosopher Swami Vivekananda famously stated, "Wherever there is a recognized system of thought, there you can trace his influence." He stands there, the shining, glorious, wonderful Kapila.
But with that level of massive, foundational influence comes intense academic and theological debate. Because everyone wanted to claim Kapila, scholars have argued for centuries over what he actually meant.
And this brings us to the great philosophical enigma surrounding him, the debate over God.
The controversy over whether classical Samkhya is theistic accepting a supreme god or atheistic rejecting a supreme god is perhaps the most persistent debate in Indian philosophy.
Let's lay out the arguments for the listener. Was the father of philosophy an atheist?
Well, if you rely purely on the classical academic texts of Samkhya, the answer appears to be a definitive yes. The academic interpretation argues that Samkhya is a strictly non-theistic system, and their logical reasoning is incredibly sharp.
Walk us through their logic. Why do they exclude God?
They argue that an eternal, immutable, perfect God cannot logically be the cause of a world that is constantly changing, mutating, and deeply imperfect. If God is already perfect and lacks nothing, what could possibly be the motive for creating a universe?
Right. A perfect being has no unfulfilled desires. Creating something implies a need or a lack.
Furthermore, they argue the problem of evil and suffering. If God is perfectly good and omnipotent, why create a universe that is absolutely saturated with the threefold suffering Kapila spent his life trying to cure? It is logically inconsistent.
Therefore, classical Samkhya concludes that the universe doesn't need a divine architect. Prakriti nature operates entirely autonomously, driven solely by the presence of Purusha.
It is a cold, mechanistic, perfectly balanced view of the universe.
But there is a massive counter-argument that you simply cannot ignore. The Srimad Bhagavatam, one of the most important texts in the tradition, explicitly portrays Kapila as an incarnation of God, actively teaching bhakti, or devotion, to his mother Devahuti. How do we reconcile the atheistic logic with this deep devotion?
That's the million-dollar question.
Let's unpack this using an analogy from our sources. It's a story about Alexander the Great capturing a pirate. Alexander asks the pirate, "How dare you plague the seas?" The pirate replies, "How dare you plague the whole world? Because I do it with a small ship, I am called a thief. You do it with a great navy, and you are called an emperor."
It's a brilliant illustration of expanded sense gratification. The core mechanism is identical, right? Only the scale changes.
Exactly. The thief steals to satisfy his own immediate ego. Alexander conquers nations to satisfy a massively expanded ego that includes his empire, but it is all still fundamentally driven by the I and the mine.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Now, apply this to philosophy. If you use Kapila's rigorous intellect to understand the 25 elements purely to free yourself from suffering, you are still operating within the realm of the ego. You are just a very sophisticated philosophical thief expanding your intellect. True liberation, the kind Devahuti sought, requires the complete and total annihilation of the ego.
And the theistic argument is that the human mind cannot shatter its own ego simply by analyzing itself. It's like trying to bite your own teeth. To truly surrender the I, you must have a focal point infinitely greater than yourself to surrender to. You need devotion to a supreme being.
Which is exactly what Kapila taught his mother. So you have this intense contradiction. The rigorous texts say no God is needed, while the foundational myths say God is essential for true surrender.
Western scholars like Max Miller attempted to bridge this gap by pointing out that Kapila didn't necessarily deny the existence of God. Rather, Kapila was making an epistemological point.
What does that mean in this context?
He argued that within his specific logical framework of cause and effect, there was no logical proof required for God's existence.
So it's not God definitely doesn't exist. It's my mathematical equation of the universe balances perfectly without needing to insert God as a variable.
Exactly. Mueller compares Kapila's stance to the Western philosopher Immanuel Kant. Kapila was pointing out the inherent limits of human logic. The human mind and intellect are made of Prakriti. They are matter.
And you cannot use a material instrument to definitively prove the existence of an infinite, immaterial God.
Right. So, while the academics debate epistemology, how does the actual living tradition resolve this glaring contradiction between the atheistic texts and the devoted son of Devahuti?
The tradition offers a highly pragmatic, deeply mythical solution. They claim there wasn't just one Kapila. They said there were two Kapilas.
They literally split him in two to save the philosophy.
It's fascinating. They assert that the original ancient Kapila Devahuti Putra Kapila, the divine son of Devahuti, taught the original Samkhya, which naturally included devotion and an understanding of the Supreme Lord.
Then they claim, centuries later, an imitation Kapila emerged. This later sage stripped away the devotion and the theology, creating the purely atheistic, materialistic version of Samkhya that became so popular in academic and Buddhist circles.
It is a brilliantly convenient way to keep the father of philosophy firmly in the theistic pantheon while simultaneously explaining away the atheistic texts that bear his name.
It really highlights just how vital Kapila's foundational ideas were. No one theist, atheist, Buddhist, or yogi wanted to abandon him. They just adapted his core insights to fit their specific worldviews.
Because his core insight, the absolute distinction between the observing consciousness and the mutating matter of the mind, was so profoundly observably true that every system had to build upon it.
We have covered an immense expanse of territory today. We began with the mythological marvel of a divine son, born in the Satya Yuga with lotus eyes, who guided his own mother out of the despair of material disillusionment and into the heights of spiritual liberation.
We examine the terrifying power of the ascetic meditating in the abyss, whose mere glance incinerated the arrogance of 60,000 royal princes. A momentary act that inadvertently forced the sacred Ganges River to descend from heaven, establishing a physical pilgrimage site at Gangasagar that millions of people still journey to today.
And perhaps most significantly, we explored his legacy as the ultimate father of philosophy. The brilliant, categorizing mind who mathematically mapped human consciousness, who birthed ancient psychology by definitively classifying the intellect and ego as matter, and who laid the unshakable dualistic foundation for yoga, Buddhism, and Ayurvedic medicine.
But having explored all of this history and philosophy, we have to bring it back to you. Why does an ancient sage meticulously counting elements matter to your life right now? The practical application of Kalia's genius is actually hidden in plain sight.
How does a modern listener use this?
Every single time you sit quietly and you suddenly notice your own mind racing. Every time you observe a wave of sudden anger washing over you in traffic, or a sudden spike of joy, or a craving for a cup of coffee, every time you notice your own thought process, you are actively practicing what Kapila taught 2,600 years ago.
Because in that precise fraction of a second of observation, you are separating yourself from the emotion.
Exactly. In that moment of noticing, you are accessing the Purusha, the silent, unchanging observer. And you are watching Prakriti, your mind, which is just a subtle machine made of matter going through its chaotic, reactive motions based on the gunas.
Kapila gives you the intellectual permission to realize, I am not this wave of anger. I am the silent awareness watching the anger rise and fall.
And that single realization is the first vital step toward absolute freedom from suffering. It is an incredibly empowering shift in perspective. To close out our deep dive today, I want to leave you with a final thought inspired by a quote from our source material. It's from the American transcendentalist writer Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was himself heavily influenced by these ancient Indian philosophies.
What did he say?
Emerson wrote, "We wake and find ourselves on a stair. There are stairs below us which we seem to have ascended. There are stairs above us, many a one, which go upward and out of sight."
It's a beautiful, evocative metaphor for the continuous evolution of consciousness and the long journey of the soul through lifetimes.
It is. But if we apply Kapila's razor-sharp logic to Emerson's staircase, it leaves us with this deeply provocative thought for you to mull over. If Kapila is right, if your true self, the Purusha, is nothing but a silent, motionless, passive observer, entirely separate from the physical body and the material mind that are sweating and struggling and striving to climb those stairs,
Right.
then who or what is actually doing the climbing?